Hello and welcome to Atheist Torah Study. My name is Emma Lugo, and this is Parsha Toldot. Parsha Toldot is, I think it's about the sixth or seventh Parsha in the Torah. We're pretty deep into the narrative of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And as Richard Friedman says, he kind of thinks of this as the world's first novel. Um, Anyways, my name is Emma, and I'm the host of Atheist Torah Study. Atheist Torah Study is my own personal investigation of the Torah as an atheist. I'm reviewing the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, from a Jewish context, and I'm providing commentary, going parsha by parsha, within the framework of an atheist, but really with deep, deep respect for Jewish tradition. So today I'm really going to try to get into the text. I've spent my first 5 episodes adding a lot of commentary, which is fine, but I'm really going to try to get into the text today. So I think I've already done enough explaining about what the Torah is, what a parsha is, what Jewish tradition is. If you need to catch up on those, go ahead and visit the last 5 episodes if you can stand to watch them. And if you if you want to learn more about Judaism, or especially if you want to look at the text, I definitely encourage you to visit reformjudaism.org. It's a really great website. Also, if you want to follow the text I'm reading and get more into Jewish texts, I would definitely encourage you to visit sefaria.org. If you want to learn more about atheism or get involved with the atheist community, I would definitely encourage you to go to atheistalliance.org. That's definitely the first place I would start. I might also encourage you to look at the organization Americans United for Separation of Church and State, which is a great place if you're kind of, you're not really committed to any religion, but you're concerned about your rights, separating those. So, anyways, all right, here we go. Let's get into the text. Toldot, the twins. This is Genesis chapter 25, verse verse 19, I think. Although I'm going to start a little bit before that. I'm going to start with the death of Abraham, just to put it in some context. Chapter 8. And Abraham breathed his last. Oh, sorry, I forgot to do the blessing for Torah study. Oof. All right, here's the blessing for Torah study. This is in Hebrew, and then I'll try to remember how you say it in English. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishano b'mitzvotah b'tzivano la'asok v'dvrei Torah. And it just basically means it's kind of a blessing for Torah study. Jews say a lot of blessings before everything they do. I don't. I mean, I'm okay. I'm gonna stop the ad hominem. I do that too much. All right. So here goes. Abraham breathed his last, dying at a ripe old age. Old and contented, he was gathered to his kin. So there you go. There's the context. Abraham's just died, and so but the story must move on. His sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave at Machpelah in the field of Ephron, son of Zohar, the Hittite, facing Mamre. So he's being buried in the land. This is part of the really difficult. Well, we'll get into it in just a minute. Anyway, so just to kind of provide a little context of the story, you see here that Abraham has died, and that his sons Isaac and Ishmael, who, you don't hear anything about Ishmael, but here Ishmael, at the end of Abraham's life, is with him, along with his son Isaac. So, okay, here goes just a minute. And I'm back. Okay, so now we're going to start on the Parsha. This is Parsha Toldot, the twins, which we'll find out in just a minute. It's pretty obvious why that's the name of it. This is the story of Isaac, son of Abraham. Abraham begot Isaac. Okay, so we already know that happened. Although Abraham didn't begot Isaac, actually Sarah begot Isaac. Although none of that really happened. This is just a story, so none of this actually happened. Isaac was 40 years old when he took to wife Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Padan Aram, and sister of Laban, the Aramean. Okay, so we already know about that. We heard about that last. Or if you didn't hear about it, maybe you already are familiar with the story. Isaac pleaded with Adonai, with Hashem, on behalf of his wife because she was barren, and Hashem responded to his plea, and his wife Rebekah conceived. Okay, so we've moved right away from the story of Abraham. Now this is about Isaac, but it's not really about Isaac. It's actually about Rebekah, and it's also about Rachel later on, and it's about Leah. I mean, this is actually a part of the Torah that's kind of framed in the language of more of a kind of matriarchal tradition. And it's hard to see it in the text because the problem is that the text has been redacted so much. I mean, I've really been thinking about this while I've been doing this Torah study. I've been thinking, because I had this experience last week. Recently, I should just say recently, because if somebody sees this, it won't have a time relative to it. Anyways, I was at this event last week, and it was called Torah, and it's I went and listened to this woman speak about how she's rewriting the Torah, and she belongs to this community of people who's rewriting the Torah, where basically they switch the genders of all the characters, so that in the Torah now the males become females and the females become males. So instead of Adam and Eve, it's, they're like Adam is a woman and Eve is a man. And they do that for all the characters. And it's really interesting because it really like radically changes the meaning of the Torah when you read it. And like all of the characters, the main characters are women and God's a woman. And I thought, that's kind of interesting. That's an interesting experiment. And, I mean, these people who were given this talk, well, actually, I don't know. I don't think they're atheists, but, they're definitely not. I think she said she was, well, I shouldn't really talk about her. Anyways, I think that these people, who are doing this aren't atheists, though I think it's pretty clear they're probably religious, or at least, I mean, they must at least have enough respect for the tradition and believe that there's some, something in the universe that, the way religious people talk, to actually do this kind of work. So, anyways, the point of that is that these people who really care enough about the tradition and the text to like rewrite the story that way, are doing something that was done at least once before. Because, the way that this text was written in the first place was that it was written. Somebody actually wrote it. And whoever wrote the text in the first place thought that it had some kind of really sacred and inspired and important meaning. Or who knows what they thought. The thing is, we don't, with the text, we don't know what anyone thought when they were writing it. I mean, everything that we think about the text is just a projection. I mean, I could sit here, I'm not going to do it, but I could sit here, locked up in my room, and I could write a, 1,000 page document in a couple months, and I could think that it's the inspired work of God. And if enough people believe it, then they'll start treating it that way. I mean, that's how the text could be. But, I mean, the theory about the text, anyways, is that the text arose from oral tradition. So the theory is that the text was kind of massaged through storytelling for generations and generations. Like, so, I mean, from an archaeological perspective, from an anthropological perspective, I mean, this is what I understand. What I understand is that there is this place called Canaan. It was in the, in the Bronze Age and in the Iron Age. It was in the Levant, which is that area where Israel and Syria, Jordan, Palestine, all those countries are now. And there was a group there, an indigenous group called the Canaanites. And over the course of many centuries, they developed into these kingdoms and they had these different religious practices. And one of the practices became like the kind of what was the foundations of Judaism. And then at some point, the Torah was written probably in the 4th century or 3rd century BC. And it's supposed to be based on oral traditions that came from around the area. So, the idea is that these different oral traditions like came together, and finally when somebody saw. But the thing that's so interesting is that we don't really have any Torahs before like the 4th century. The 3rd century. It's when you look at the archaeological record, there's like cuneiform tablets going back like 4,000 years. We had the Epic of Gilgamesh, but we don't really have the Torah written anywhere before the 3rd century. So, it could be that it was there and somebody destroyed it. Just like I said in a previous episode, an absence of something does not mean that it's disproven, because this is this is how propaganda works. The way propaganda works is people try to erase history and then they make up their own version of history. So like people who say there's no Holocaust, it's like, that's insane. Everybody knows it, but there's people who think that there was, if they can just erase enough history, and if they can just say things that aren't true over and over again, that somehow makes them true. I actually know a certain person who ran for president twice, 3 times, who basically believes that. So if you just make something up and if you just say it, and if enough people believe it, then it's true. And, in a way, that's kind of what happened with all of Western religious history, is that, people just made up a bunch of stuff and enough people believed it and then it was true. And that actually explains a lot of it. Anyways, let's keep on going. So Isaac pleads on behalf of the divine. And this is a repeat of the story before of Abraham and Sarah. And I'm not exactly sure why, the writers of the Torah decided that, if Abraham and Sarah, if they didn't have children, then, the same thing has to be true of Isaac and Rebecca. I don't know why it does that. The Torah repeats a lot. It really does. And I think that what's really interesting about the Torah too is that, again, it puts you in the mindset of the people who wrote it. So this is before we had more conventional literary devices. And so people who are writing this at the time are like, oh, wow, this is just, they're thinking this is how you do really good writing. And so that's part of why this happens. This is why the story gets repeated again. And it's also like, I don't know. For people who are trying to understand the world and they think that, there's magical, mysterious forces at work in the world that like cause things to happen. Because again, this is also in addition to like all the other things that we've talked about, that I've talked about, sorry. In addition to the other things that I've talked about, this is also a time when there isn't a lot of science. People don't know how anything in the world happens. And so it's much more open to interpretation and to the amazing qualities of some hidden force. And that's totally understandable. I wish that we had explanations for things that we don't know right now. Think about some of the things that you don't know, that in the future people will be like, oh, I wonder why they were so dumb they didn't know that. Because that's how the future will be. Unless we destroy ourselves, in the future, our descendants will be much, much more knowledgeable than we are. They'll probably be more intelligent. They'll probably be more advanced. they'll definitely have a culture that has done more investigation and better understands almost everything about reality than we do. And for them, some of the ways that we look at the world will seem very strange. It could be that religion is really strange in the future. I have no idea. Um, Although, for all of the development that we've done as a species, and for all of the education, I mean, so much of the world is educated now. They're literate. And, it just seems to feed religion. So it's like, I don't know, maybe people will still be deeply religious in the future. But we may have answers to things that we don't know right now. Like one of the things I really wonder about is like, I wonder about the Fermi hypothesis, the Fermi hypothesis, which is about, is life extremely rare in the universe or is it abundant? I mean, I imagine that in the future, even if we don't travel very far past our own solar system, we'll have the kind of technology that'll help us get a better understanding of what how common life is in the universe, and that's a big one. I mean, I think we'll have a better understanding of the beginning of the universe. We'll have a better understanding of cosmology, of planet formation, probably of the human mind. Who knows what the future will be like? But at that time, when there's people looking back at our time, they might think that we're very primitive and that we don't know much. And one of the things one of the many reasons I really enjoy reading this text and studying it, and part of why I value it, is because it's a great window into the past. I mean, even if it's just a few people, it shows you a lot of stuff. It shows you, first of all, it shows you what the people who wrote the Torah think, and their time frame. So even if the Torah was only written in the 3rd century BC, if the Torah was, it's like I kind of see the Torah right now as like the beginning or somewhere near the beginning of a chain of historical events that kind of went from like the Torah through this certain period in classical antiquity when people were starting to write these religious narratives and they were realizing and understanding the value of writing down these myths as a way of kind of explaining a people and creating some kind of moral context for understanding their place in the world as a people. So, even if that was the only time it was written, it still gives you an idea of what people were thinking about 2,300 years ago, which to me is fascinating because there's so few places I can go to really understand thought. And it's not like I really understand how people think this long ago because over the years, how the language functions, how it serves its meaning within the context of that society also changes. Unfortunately, the meaning of the language changes too. And so there's a lot of phrases, there's a lot of terms, there's a lot of subtleties to how the language provides meaning that are very much contextual to each generation. And then the generation after that kind of like reworks it and gives it some sort of new meaning. And I think part of why I'm doing this Torah study is because there's nothing more contextual and there's nothing more interpretive than this idea of God. This idea of a God is so culturally relevant. It's very, very culturally relevant. So, like, now people's idea of a God might be some sort of magical, invisible force that's like extends over the entire universe. I mean, but in here in this text, when they talk about a God, I mean, it takes all these different forms. It's like sometimes it's an angel, sometimes it's a burning bush, sometimes it's a pillar of fire. You can't ever see it. So, but just even thinking about what it is, it's like you can't really know what it meant to these people. I mean, but I think you have an idea. I think that you really have an idea of what it probably meant, but you don't really know. And then to think that the text got massaged and worked over and reinterpreted so many generations, I mean, it hasn't stopped being interpreted, means that people still are continuing to work with these different ideas about what a god means. You know, now and so then I think, well, part of the consistency, so the God that's in this text, the Yodhe Vavhe, the Hashem, this God is part of the way that this God is still kept is through religious indoctrination. I mean, there's just no doubt about it. One of the most fundamental tools is, and it tells you exactly how to do this in the Torah. And, Jews do it, Christians do it, Muslims do it. Part of the way that these texts perpetuate themselves. And I think personally, probably the most fundamental way they do is simply by parents indoctrinating their children. So as long as you have parents who indoctrinate their children and tell them from a very early age about whatever the religious text is, whether it's Christianity, Islam, Judaism, or any other religion. Yeah, I mean, if you tell enough people the same thing over and over again, and those people see everybody else around them thinking the same way, then that kind of constitutes a cultural narrative. And that cultural narrative becomes foundational to how the person interprets the world. And the same thing is true of all of these religions, that cultural narrative becomes, a framework, but the only way that it can perpetuate itself is if children are indoctrinated in it. If you take children, like let's just do a thought experiment, okay? If you took all of the children on earth and you just let them, you were like, okay, what we're going to do is let you explore every single religion there is and also lack of religion. And so, like, for your entire life until you're 18, you're not going to be exposed to any one religion. You're going to see, like, all of the different religions of the world, And you're also going to explore atheism. And then once you turn 18, it's some arbitrary number, then you can decide for yourself what you think is true about the world. There's like, I don't know. I can't remember the last time I looked, but recently I was looking online, and I thought I saw a figure that there's like 7,000 religions on Earth. So I don't think that you can even teach a kid all the religions. But there's a lot of religions on the planet, and if you don't indoctrinate your children from the time that they're very young in your religion, then there's a lot of other religions to choose from. And I wonder, I really wonder, like, if you just erased all of these texts from people's memories, this would be another thought experiment. What if you erased everybody's memory of religion? So say you had a society, you could erase their entire memory of religion, and then you just gave them these texts and said, okay, decide for yourself what text really interpretively has meaning for you. So but it's easy to sit here in a chair and speculate about this, but I also know that these stories just have incredible meaning to religious people. They really do. And the reason that they do is because the texts, there's more to the story than the indoctrination. The texts, especially ones like the Torah. The Torah is really good at this. So part of what the texts do is people who are suffering. There's just all kinds of horrible suffering in the world. People have accidents. Their loved ones die. They get diseases. They have pain. Their children die. They lose all their money. There's terrible things that happen to us. In our life, and our life is just an incredible amount of suffering. We're lucky. Well, I shouldn't say we. I don't know who's watching this. I'll just say a lot of people I know who grew up in America in the 20th century or the 21st century have it really good. I mean, we have a standard of, a lot of people in this country have a standard of living that's unlike anything that anyone has ever seen in history. And there's a certain amount of political stability, and there's a certain amount of economic stability, and there's a certain amount of economic prosperity. And so, at least for some people, life is really good. And there's never been a life like this for a lot of people. Um, but for a lot of history, life was really awful. And people didn't have a lot of answers, they didn't have a lot of education. And religion was such a tremendous form of I mean, I think one of the other functions of religion was just that it really gave people a lot of comfort. I mean, they really had a lot of comfort in religion because they didn't know why things happen. And, maybe they didn't have, another thing it could be is that they didn't have a community that was there to really comfort them. Or the religion creates the community. It's very complicated. It's like, I mean, as somebody who's has a bent toward an analysis and toward kind of really looking at things more objectively. I mean, it's really easy to lose touch with the fact that this is really a text about human values and human emotions. And, that place where you get in your own personal life where you just can't explain anything further. And so, people turn to religion. So I think that's why the religion's there. I mean, it has so many overlapping spaces in it where there's narratives that people find comforting because it helps them to create this projection. I mean, part of what a god is, and this is part of what I'm going to continue talking about throughout throughout the throughout the years. Part of what a god is a god is an imaginary thing. It's an imaginary thing that kind of gives you comfort. And it's like, I think in a way, that's probably what gods have always been. Gods have always been this idea that humans make up to kind of fill the absence, to like fill the spaces where they don't have answers, where they don't have explanations, where, they're looking for some higher purpose. And I mean, in a way, I mean, I think you could almost do this as an atheist. I mean, in a way, I think that maybe people's desire to have a God is actually a healthy starting point for trying to answer questions and to, in a way, it's kind of like it's a placeholder for human curiosity. So it's like we know humans are curious. We know that they want explanations to why the world is the way that it is. We know that people want to be comforted. We know that people want to be comforted when they're suffering, and we know that people have these profoundly human emotions that are part of what we are as mammals, and they people need something. They need something, and in a really complex world, maybe the idea of a god is kind of a placeholder for where we're not quite there yet. So we haven't quite gotten to the world yet where everybody has something equal. So like, I mean, in the world that we live in right now. So I heard another thing yesterday. Now I don't know if this is true or not. I mean, a lot of stuff I hear, I hear it, and I don't know if it's true. But somebody was telling me the other day that like 1 in 7 people on Earth is starving or something like that. I mean, I have a hard time believing that 1 in 7 people is starving. That would mean that there's 8 billion people on Earth. So 1 in 7 would mean more than 1 billion people on Earth are starving. Now, maybe that's true. I mean, I know there's a lot of people, just to time date where I'm at right now. I know that there's a lot of people right now in Gaza who are starving. That really bothers me. But I don't know that 1 billion people are starving. But I do know that the point of the story, though, is that I do know that there's just gross inequities in the world between what people have and what they don't have. And, the life of people in Western and developed countries is just like this total, I mean, it's this contextual difference that's just huge between that and the developing world. And I know that there's this really complex process that happens that's really benefited the West. The West, tends to use exploitation and extraction and, the military to control its resources in order to benefit itself. And then, the countries that are in the developing countries also kind of get a little kick from that exploitation that benefits their entire society. I mean, this is just, I'm sorry, but this is just the truth. So there's these gross inequities in the world. And maybe one of the functions of religion isn't really it's to be a placeholder for the fact that we don't have an equal society yet. And it's like maybe people have an instinctive understanding that, if one of us has a lot or whatever one of us has, like everyone should have. Not that everyone should be the same, but that everyone should basically have the same kind of access to the same kinds of opportunities in life. And that's actually a profoundly human instinct. Now maybe some people, I mean, one of the things that you see in religion, one of the things you see in religion is that the exact opposite of that often comes up. I mean, so religion is also used to deny that very instinct. But the instinct is there. And part of what I think is so fascinating about the Torah is that the Torah, much more so than the New Testament, I have to be honest about this because I know the New Testament very well too. I also very much know Christian tradition. One of the things that's really different about the Torah from the New Testament and the Christian tradition is that the Torah is much more honest about what its authors are thinking and about what they imagine a deity is. I mean, when you look at how Christianity has been over 2,000 years, including the Holocaust, Christianity has not been a great religion. I mean, neither has Islam. And neither has Judaism. None of these religions have really done that good of a job at kind of reflecting and expressing outwardly what they imagine the best aspects of their deity would be. They've really done a terrible job of that. And but one of the things I really like about the Torah is that the Torah is much more honest about the development of their idea of a God. I mean, the God in the Torah is a very complicated God. He's arrogant. He's definitely a man. He's quick to judgment. He's impulsive. He's this imaginary being who doesn't really quite get human beings, and human beings don't really get him either. And they don't really quite ever really understand each other all that well, you know. And to me, that's so much better of a God than an all-knowing, all-powerful God who loves you and who cares about you. And the reason is because the all-knowing, all-powerful God who loves you and cares about you, is just, that's total blow. I mean, the world isn't like that. But it's nice to think that, you want to get to a place not where there's something over you that loves you and cares about you, but to think that there's a world out there where there's enough compassion and there's enough people actually advocating and pushing for the common good that everybody has love and everybody is watched out for, where homeless people don't die on the streets by themselves, and where, children get raised with love and with opportunity, and where everybody has, an education and has a meaningful life and is able to contribute in a good and positive way. To me, that would be great. And I think that that's kind of one of the directions that this God goes in. The God of the Torah definitely kind of goes in this direction. And this is what a God is. I mean, a God is a collective expression of what a society thinks about itself and what it thinks about its future, what it thinks about its past, and what it thinks its own meaning is. And that's what a God is, you know. Anyway, so let's go on with the text. So Isaac pleaded with the divine on behalf of his wife because she was barren. And the divine responded to his plea, and Rebekah conceived. So, you know, again, we're just kind of repeating the story of Abraham and Sarah. This is this text is very much obsessed with having children and giving birth. You know, as if people haven't been doing this ever since the very beginning of life on Earth. But in that way, it's not bad either, because it's at some foundational level, it's just obsessed with reproduction and lineage and heritage. One of the nice things that we know about evolution, but the thing is, I think people knew this back then too. But one of the nice things about human evolution and, the evolution of life on Earth and the perpetuation of life on Earth is that you really don't have to do anything to make it happen. It basically just happens because it's such a fundamental drive that it's just going to happen. And it doesn't appear that it matters how intelligent we are, or how much we have advanced as a society. We still just go on reproducing like rabbits. That's why there's 8 billion of us. So I don't think you really need a religious text to tell people to reproduce, or to think it's a miracle that people reproduce. But the text isn't really saying that. So what the text is saying twice here is that for this individual, they think that it's important for their personal lineage that they reproduce, and that they can't. And so then there's a divine being, and the divine being has a role in their reproduction. So, I could take it on its face value. So it's an individual. So right away, and this is part of the really interesting thing about language too. So you created an individual, and then you read the text and you immediately empathize with that individual. So you place yourself in that individual's, seat. And so right away you've lost yourself and you become them in the story. And so then for you as an individual, you feel as if your own personal line must continue on. So this is going back towards you, and it's reflecting on the anxiety that like any adult has. Well, I have to say that I don't understand this, because I don't understand why it's so important that different individuals feel like they need to reproduce. And I'll tell you part of why I think this. I'll get to it in just a second. So I was talking with a friend the other day, and we were talking about this because neither of us has children. And we were talking about like, did you feel some sort of urge like you had to reproduce and, have lots of children? And this was a kind of a queer conversation. I mean, I think this is some conversation that queers maybe have sometimes, or just lots of people have it. Maybe millennials have it too. And, we were both talking about how like there's 8 billion people on the planet. There's already 8 billion people on the earth. And we're, extreme extractors of resources, and there's global warming now. And, we're like we're mining the ocean. We're scraping the ocean floor for minerals. And we've basically like ruined almost every habitat that we've entered into. And, not having children, for you not having children, or for me not having children, is not going to do much to have any effect on the incredible devastation that we've done to the planet as a species. But collectively, 8 billion people having children means that there's going to be another 8 billion people on Earth at least, or more. And, our numbers are just crazy. I mean, we never had so many people on the planet, and it wasn't that long ago, maybe just 100 years ago, or even less, that we didn't even have 1 billion people on the Earth. And it's like, our numbers have just exploded like rabbits. And I personally don't think that, necessarily reproducing in such vast quantities is necessary. But so we were talking, we talked about I didn't talk about atheists. I should have talked about, I wonder how many atheists there are in the world. I mean, I personally think everybody's really an atheist because there's never been any evidence of any God. And yeah, I mean, I think at some point in your life, you just kind of come to understand that, but you still want to believe in a God anyways. But, regardless, people don't identify as atheists. People identify as religious. So people who identify as religious, there's only I think I don't know how many people are Jewish now in the world. I think maybe 12 million. And then there's I think there's about 1.5 billion Christians. I think there's 2 billion Muslims. That's a lot of. And we were talking about how you know, different why are there so many more of one religion than another? And it's complicated. I mean, part of the reason that there's so many more of these different religions is because, well, part of it is that these religions really, emphasize fertility and reproduction. I mean, you see that happening in America right now. America is again, this is a dated period in time. So if you see this in 4 years and everything's changed, then ignore this part. But right now, where America is at is America's really deeply, it's really been deeply sucked into a Christian nationalist narrative where, there's basically right now part of the leading edge of the culture wars has pushed back from where it was 50 years ago. And now it's going in the opposite direction where it's trying to control women's fertility and it's trying to control women's reproductive capacity. And it's I don't know why. I mean, there's already 330 million people in America. There's, if you're really concerned about if there's enough people in the country, then just let the immigrants stay rather than every election cycle threatening to kick them out, because the immigrants add just as much to the population as if, you tried to control all the women's fertility. But there's, Christians have this obsession with controlling women's fertility. And they, there's a certain strand of Christianity that really emphasizes that women have to reproduce a lot. And the same thing is true in certain sects of Judaism, in strains of Judaism that are more orthodox and that are more conservative. This idea that, you have to produce a lot of children is really fundamental to the religion. And I don't know what I don't think anybody's ever done a study on us atheists and what our reproductive habits are. My guess, though, would be that a lot of atheists, we just don't choose to reproduce. But, probably we're just like most people and we still have lots of children anyways, But I don't know why there's this obsession with reproduction because it's not really healthy for the planet. And on the whole, it's not really healthy for our survival. I mean, having so many people isn't really good for anything. It's just, it's just that the thing is that for us to be able to think about it is not the same thing as how the world really works. I mean, on the level of how the world really works, people are being driven by really strong evolutionary instincts, and they're just, until we figure out how to, alter the fundamental drives in human beings, this is going to continue to happen. So anyways, side note. So Isaac, I already read that about Isaac. Well, I've only gotten through 3 verses of the Parsha and we're already 45 minutes into the story. So I guess I didn't really get into the text this time like I thought I would, but I'm going to try. So we'll keep on going. Anyway, so Rebecca conceived. So that's the miracle. Rebecca conceives. But the children struggled in her womb, and she said, "If so, why do I exist?" And I guess what that meant is she's supposed to be asking herself, why are the women struggling in her womb? And she's wondering what is the purpose of her existence. So then she goes to the divine, and the divine says to her, 2 nations are in your womb. 2 separate peoples shall issue from your body. One people shall be mightier than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. So that's pretty interesting. So one thing about the Torah that I just want to say here is that this part of the Torah is considered to be older than other parts. Now, I don't know that any of this is really true, but the way that it's taught is that, generally speaking, when you find fragments of poetry in the Torah, because most of the Torah is not poetry, or it's not really written to be poetry, but then there are certain parts of the text that are clearly written to be different from the rest of the text, and they're kind of written as poetry. And the understanding of how the Torah was composed is that those parts are generally considered to be much older. A really good example of this is the Song of the Sea, which is this song that Miriam sings, or maybe I know Moses sings it. That's right, Moses sings it. When after the we'll get to this later, but so after the Hebrew people passed through, in the story. This is a great story. So after the Hebrew people passed through the ocean, when the ocean has been separated in two so that they can walk across the bottom of the ocean, then all of the Egyptians follow them into the ocean, and then the ocean closes up on them. That's a good story. It took some imagination to think of that. I mean, scientifically, it has a lot of problems. Like it doesn't say that the divine made the bottom of the ocean, dry and flat. So it's like, I don't know if you've ever tried walking across a river bottom, but it's like, it's really hard. It's really hard to try to move through that. I actually got stuck once in a glacial mud field, and it swallowed up half of my body. It was really scary. I mean, I had to put part of my body flat on top of the glacial mud field and then pull the bottom half of my body back out of the mud. So, I don't know if it would really work to actually do things that way, but in the story, that's what happens. And the Song of the Sea is the song about what happens when the ocean collapses back down on all of the Egyptians, and they're all turned upside down and they're all drowned. So that's supposed to be really old text. Now here's another really old text. This is supposed to be really old text. And it's 2 nations are in your womb. 2 separate people shall issue from your body. 1 people shall be mightier than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. So I was teaching Torah at prison the other day, because I do that. And some people we were talking about this, and we were like, well, what does this mean? What is this about? And it has a lot of really interesting elements to it. And from my perspective as an atheist, it's really fun to talk about stuff like this because it's just so strange. So but what I think that this means, this is like my own understanding of this, and I'm totally going on my own with this, but it's like, I think that what this means is that this was probably written at a time when people were trying to explain, like, oh, why is our country this way? And not country, but why are our people this way? And those people over there, why are they that way? Why are they different? Because it seems like we're so similar in every other way, but those people, they do something different, like they wear their hat to the left and we wear our hat to the right, and why do we do that? It's like, and it's a good question. I mean, they're trying to answer a question about why people are different, but the only way that they can figure out how to answer it is by telling a story. And the story is that there's these 2 babies in somebody's womb, and they're struggling. This really isn't that different from other stories, like the story of Romulus and Remus. I think, okay, now I'm totally going off the farm here. But, Romulus and Remus was a story that was circulating around at the same time that the Torah was being redacted in the 3rd century BC. This is like, let's say that the Torah maybe was written around the time of the Library of Alexandria. By that time, boy, this would be really interesting. I've never thought about this before. By the time that the Roman Empire became ascendant, where it was rising in power, it was trying to do something very similar with its own myths, with its own narratives. And of course, they have the story of Romulus and Remus. And, that's not the only set of twins in mythology. There's lots of twins in mythology. So it's like this is a very old archetype. This is an old narrative. And there's probably a lot of cultures that have told stories about twins as a way of trying to explain their own culture. And I think that's what this is. I mean, I think that really this is like this is like these people in this part of the world are trying to understand themselves, and so they're going to make up this story about a mother goddess. That's really what this is. Yeah. This is Rebecca, and Rebecca's like the mother goddess. But part of what's so clever about the Torah, this is part of why the Torah has survived a long time. Part of what's so clever about it is that they've taken something that everybody else around them was probably doing, including the Romans, and instead of like making the goddess herself some grand mythological narrative, they made the goddess into just a person. It's just the goddess is just an ordinary person. She's just an ordinary Jane or Jill. And, she's having this experience with having two babies. That's something that anyone can connect with. You can't necessarily connect with the idea of something that's so big and vast and beyond yourself, that you just don't have any connection with it. They've actually taken the mythology of, a goddess, and they've contained her into just one person. And then that one person, instead of the goddess herself being like some miraculous thing within this one person, she's actually just part of an entire story. So the story, and she's just part of a chain of people in the story. So they've really personalized what I think was probably really commonplace at the time in terms of how people do mythology and how they do storytelling based on their pantheons. But the other thing that the story is doing is that it's, I think, really trying to explain a difference between like one cultural group and an adjacent cultural group that obviously has a very similar heritage. In this case, it might be that this is kind of the story that the Jews are telling themselves about how are Judeans different from the Canaanites, because there's a lot of that in the Torah. There's a lot of like the Judeans have to be different from their neighbors, but their neighbors, they a lot of times they speak the same language. They use all the same technology. They probably have a lot of the same practices. I mean, this already has gone through that a little bit. It's like Abraham goes to Ur, he goes over to Mesopotamia, and then he comes back to Canaan. And it's like, this is what people were doing all the time around there. And wherever people go, wherever you go in at that time and place, you're going to find a lot of similarities, but you're also going to find a few differences. So this is maybe trying to explain that. Well, I've squandered away almost all of my time, as I usually do, on atheist Torah study, and I only made it through 5 verses today. So that's pretty good. Pretty good for me, I guess. It's better than 3 verses or no verses. The Parsha itself is about, I'm not sure how many chapters it is. I think it's about 4 chapters. It goes on, I'm just going to kind of summarize a little bit of what's still there because I'm not going to get to most of it. No, actually, there's a part I have to read up here just a little bit further along. So what happens is Rebecca has 2 kids, Jacob and Esau. And then there's this whole story about sibling rivalry. And but I have to just read the part. As an atheist, I just find it really entertaining and kind of endearing. So they kind of skip over their whole life and how they've been raised and everything. The Torah does this a lot with its characters too. It's part of why, like, the Torah wasn't really workshopped in like a modern novel writing workshop class, and it skips a lot of details. So Rebecca has these 2 twins, and it doesn't really explain like what they're fighting about, but they're just fighting. And then at the end of that story, suddenly I mean, just a couple of verses along, it skips their entire childhood and everything that's significant that ever happened to them. And it gets to this story about lentil stew. So I want to read this part because it's kind of, I find it kind of funny. So it gets to this story about lentil stew, and that's supposed to explain something, even though it's just a weird story. So here's the story. When the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the outdoors. But Jacob became a mild man, raising livestock. Isaac favored Esau because he had a taste for game, but Rebekah favored Jacob. One day, when Jacob was cooking a stew, Esau came in from the open, famished. Esau said to Jacob, "Give me some of that red stuff to gulp down." Oops, sorry. Once, when Jacob was cooking a stew, Esau came in from the open, famished, and said, "Give me some of that red stuff to gulp down, for I am famished," which is why he was named Edom. Jacob said, "First sell me your birthright." Esau said, "I am at the point of death. What use is my birthright?" But Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Jacob then gave Esau lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went away. Thus did Esau spurn the birthright. So that's the story. It's like what? That's supposed to be a really significant story, and I could spend a lot of time talking about it. I'm not going to have the time to do it because unfortunately I am at the end of my hour. But you can go and look it up if you want. I mean, it's basically it's just it's this tribe of people, or the people who wrote the story, are trying to explain like why they were favored by God rather than their neighbor getting favored by God. That's kind of what it comes down to basically. But it's also trying to tell something about what these people thought about those people. Anyways, I am at the end of my hour. Thank you so much for paying attention to. If you made it through the entire hour and you sat with me and listened to me, you bless your heart. You have got a lot of tolerance and patience for listening to my ramblings. But thanks so much for listening to another edition of Atheist Torah Study. This was Parsha Toldot. You can find me online, Atheist Torah Study on TikTok and on YouTube. And if you have any questions and want to write to me, you can write to me at atheisttorahstudy@gmail.com. Nobody's written to me yet. And I've noticed that this only gets viewed by maybe 2 or 3 people. So I don't even know if anyone's watching it. But if you did watch it, thank you so much and have a great day.